Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Finance and Audit Committee meeting held November 1st, 2021. I'd like to call that to order. And there is no public input, and we go right into adoption of the minutes. I need a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the Finance and Audit Committee meeting held on August 11th, 2021 be adopted.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? All in favor? Opposed? None? Approved. Did you have a... Did I cut you off?
No. Right.
A little bit of muttering from there, and I wasn't quite sure.
It was. Sorry, what was that?
So we have no delegations or unfinished business, so we'll move right into the 2021 Q3 forecast and the 2021 capital expenditures, and turn this over to Mr. Anderson.
Yes, thank you. So we've got a lot of stuff here today. We've got 90 minutes, and it probably could be a whole afternoon. I've got Sean Strang with me today, and it's accounting, and we'd love to talk all afternoon, but we're trying to condense it here as much as we can, and we will go through in the following order here. We're just going to look at the 2021 Q3 forecast, and what that is. We meet with the department directors and go through their budgets in detail to figure out where they're going to end up the year when it comes to the revenue and expenditures for their departments. So that is a process that we've gone through. And we also look at the capital side as well for the projects that are in place. Are there going to be some that are going to be completed? Are we going to carry some forward? Or are we going to just rebudget them because it might be totally different for 2022? So we've got some detail on that as well. The operating forecast here flows into the reserve and surplus balances that we have, so we'll go through a bit of a review of that and where we expect to end up the year on those as well. I do mention here on the first page that we were looking at bringing a detailed project listing forward to council on November 9th, the council meeting. This may be a committee of the whole meeting in November here that we bring that forward to versus the council meeting. So we will talk, we've got a good list of some projects here and some top 10s and those sort of things we want to get your feedback on today, but we'll probably bring more detail in a different format. On the second page of the report here, the summary of the expected operating results by division. So relative to the amended budget, so there's a few things that were amended, as you would see on page 9, that result in an amended surplus deficit of $172,000, and that is a surplus even though it has brackets around it. What's included in those numbers are things like the capital funding through grants. What's not included is amortization, so there's certain things that are and aren't included. So when you see the forecast of 1.13 million, it may look like a big number, but there is about $1 million in capital funding from grants included in that as well too. So it's not that we've knocked it out of the park, but we are ahead of plan. And that's what I wanted to focus on today, was on a revenue and expenditure basis by department. How are they performing? Where are they doing better than planned? Where are things worse than planned? And then how that flows into the reserves. The attachment one that's referred to is a summary of all departments' revenue and expenditures and capital. It's a 2-pager that's used to prepare this report. We can refer to that if we need to. At this time, I'm just going to go through snippets of that report, basically, that were included in here for your review today. So, as per the table on the bottom of page 2 there, potential revenues are $1.2 million ahead of the amended 2021 forecast, or pardon me, the amended financial plan. And this number is also about $380,000 higher than what we had forecast in Q2. So the news is getting better, which is good to see.
And can I ask a question at this point? Does that include the revised revenue for RCMP? Revised expenditures for RCMP?
Wait a second here.
Okay. Just to back up on that one, so this is revenues we're looking at here, the 1.2. On the expenditure side, we do have some numbers in there to account for the revised
Okay.
forecast on the expenditures.
That's why I said the word reference, because I was in the wrong area. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So on page 3, there is a breakdown of some of the key variances for the different departments. We'll just go through those. Here, penalties, 115,000 ahead of plan. We had some higher than forecasted outstanding tax receivables at the deadline, so there was 115,000 in additional penalty revenue. The community gas tax, or community works gas tax funding, on the revenue side, $355,000 more received. That's offset on the expenditure side by $355,000 as well, because we moved that directly over to reserves. So it's a bit of an in and out there. Recreation, we did not forecast to have a COVID vaccine clinic in the arena, which benefited us by about $88,000 by utilizing that space. Some smaller variances there for aquatic center memberships. We were pretty conservative on the plan there, and we've had better uptake on those things, as well as the civic center, some additional bookings that we were again conservative on with COVID and all. And Claybanks has done well, even though we bumped up the forecast for 2021, it actually is 42,000 higher than what we had forecast, so it's doing quite well. And we've added on additional spaces and stuff at the campground. Development services, zoning, DPA and zoning fees, 82,000 higher than what we had forecast. Building permits up 70,000. And grants up 154,000, and that's not necessarily new grants. It's some grants that we've had for a couple of years that we've just been deferring the expenditures on, real dividend stuff. And Don and the team there are planning to make sure that they do some of those projects that we said we were going to do, and claim that and bring it into revenue. So that's primarily what the variance is there. Protective services fire, and although it was a terrible summer for wildfires, from a wildfire services perspective, we have about $250,000 in billings for equipment that we provided to those fires this year, so that wasn't planned for.
And that's for our fire equipment, that's not our emergency services.
That's not the highway patrol stuff, the emergency services. This is really directly related to wildfires.
Equipment and crews.
Thank you.
Public Works, with the wildfires again, $240,000 in additional fuel sales at the airport. So that probably equates to about a $20,000 or $30,000 net profit, but $240,000. Composting site, I had a plan on the sales at the composting site as well. We have lower than planned water sales, both commercial and for the Trans Mountain facility there, with the restrictions that were on and the fact that their camp wasn't up to full capacity. The numbers were down on Trans Mountain. And commercial, I think that probably relates a bit to COVID and the fact that there was a constraint on restaurants and those sort of things, so the water consumption numbers were down in 2021 relative to what we had hoped. The septic sales side of it, the new facility there, we're $200,000 off of what we had forecast for that facility, again just due to the fact that the camp was not up to full capacity. And again, with water on the commercial side, sewer is based on water consumption, so when water's down, sewer's down as well, so that's the commercial fees being down as well. That's the revenue side. Any questions on revenue before we move to expenditures?
Thanks, Mike. Just one question. A lot of these things are up, but they're not going to be recurring. Do you have a total non-recurring number that we want to look at? Because I guess we got to be kind of careful how we go. We all see all this extra money coming in, and we just want to make sure we're over budgeting probably for the next year, because a lot of this is not going to be recurring.
Yes, Councillor, that's a good point. Things like the wildfire 250 and those sort of things, those things will not be recurring, hopefully, not recurring.
Yeah, that's
So if you were just to take the wildfire and the airport sales, fuel sales, that's about $500,000 right there that likely would not be in the plan for 2022.
Yeah, just so I have a picture of it as well.
Okay.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Councillor Etcher.
But at the same time, even though that we may not have some of those recurring costs, like with wildfire or the COVID rental at 87.5, if recreation services is busy again with bookings and back up to normal, that can see an increase as well. Because we're a little higher because we're conservative, but that may also counter it somewhat as well, no?
Yes, Councillor Archer. Yeah, the facility side of things and the membership side, we were pretty conservative in 2021, so I would hope that 2022 we have higher revenues for recreation to offset some of these things that are non-recurring.
Thanks.
So on the expenditure side here by division, we see a increase compared to the final budget there of $250,000. That's the amended financial plan. When you exclude the community works gas tax amount of $355, so that shows as a big number on the bottom of the schedule there, we're actually forecasted to be $105,000 less than our amended budget. And that's $289,000 less than what we were forecasting at Q2 as well. So the expenditure is coming down a little bit compared to last forecast and better than the amended budget. So on page 4, the expenditure variances by division. In finance and IT consultants have cost us about $20,000 more this year compared to our amended plan. We had some staffing gaps that resulted in the use of consultants a bit more than we had planned. Human resources, recruiting $10,000 higher than amended plan. I think we chatted about this last time with all of these positions that we're looking at and some of them are very difficult to hire for. We've had to be creative on how to recruit, and that's coming in higher than even the amended plan, which we amended upwards recently as well.
And I understand that we also had hired, but there was no housing options available in town, so individuals have chosen not to come here because they couldn't live here. So I want to keep that open for some point so that we can start looking at potential options.
Okay.
Thank you.
Corporate administration. This is Greg Lois's area here, so he can comment directly on these if required. But savings on legal, $15,000 under on the legal side. Contracted services, $9,000 below plan. Conferences and seminars, $10,000 under, and that's generally across the board when you look at the object code expenditures, conferences, training, those sort of things, just because of COVID down compared to plan. We were hopeful, but things didn't transpire. We were under $20,000 on communications. The hire took a little longer than planned there, so some savings to be had. And savings of $89,000 in RCMP city staff costs. So the city component, individuals that are there that are paid by the city, $89,000 potential savings this year. That's offset by an increase of $95,000 to cover the RCMP contract settlements. Now, contract settlements are estimated to be in the neighborhood of about $650,000. We've accrued over $400,000 of that, based on what information we had at the beginning of the year. So there's a $250,000 potential variance. Now, $95,000 over, you might ask, that's not the $250,000, but normally we run about $100,000 to $200,000 favorable variances with RCMP just because of delay in hiring and those sort of things. So the staffing increase of $95,000 over the plan should net us about $200,000 to $250,000 to cover off those additional payments for those retro numbers that the RCMP will be providing. Recreation and facilities. There was some staff saving at the arena due to closures and time it took to hire some of those positions as well. Some maintenance costs were down. The Civic Center due to fewer events. Savings and maintenance again at the Aquatic Center. And Claybank's expenditures up 13,000, but that's up because of the increased revenues. Those are our contractor payments. So generally, not a lot to speak of on expenditure side for recreation and facilities. Generally down just because of activity, but development services, $100,000 savings on consultants. So due to us being able to hire a level 1 and level 3 contractor, we had forecasted that we were going to be higher on the consulting side, and that's going to come down, just the fact that we've got people in place now, so that's good. And the economic development, $90,000 over plan spend in that area is related to that rural dividend funding that we're bringing into revenue. We're going to be spending money, but we're going to be recognizing that revenue as well. So we're going to try to utilize those outstanding dividends that we've received. Protective services, fire training on paid on calls, that's under plan. They had fewer opportunities this year to train people. Bit more spend on the ESS side, which could be understood this year with the wildfires. We were a little higher on that.
Does ESS get included in reimbursement by ENBC?
Some of which,
Okay.
some, yeah.
And paid on call fire suppression, 75,000 over plan due to wildfire responses. So we paid, as Sean mentions, we pay those individuals along with get reimbursed for the equipment, so we had higher paid on call expenditures this year. Public Works, airport expenditures shows to be over plan by 242,000. That's primarily fuel purchases. So that big uptick, although we did have some additional crack sealing and staffing costs at the airport as well, over and above the fuel purchases. 214,000 in savings on the water utility. That covers they've got a whole bunch of GL accounts there, and that covers a number of different areas, a few thousand here and there, but it totals up to over 214,000 on the water utility side. And 34,000 over plan on compost, and you recall that we're over plan on revenue as well, but our material costs offset that some of that revenue increase. Capital and funding, the $355,000 transfer from the community gas tax fund. That's, as I mentioned, comes into revenue and goes out back to the capital as part of the reserves. Any questions on the expenditure side before we move on? On page 5,
No, I was just more of just noticing like 34,000 on the compost. They have 41,000 more than expected, but 34,000 in cost. So it looks like we have 41,000 in revenue, but it's less with 34,000. So is it more like 7 really?
yeah, not net profit on that would be about 7, right? So 41,000 in additional revenue costs us 34,000. If all other things accounted for, it's probably our margin on the material. It's
just like beer, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thanks.
That's a problem. Object codes on page 5. So we talked about this at the last meeting. We can go through expenditures by object code to kind of see where potentially there are some trends in spending, wages and training and those sort of things. So there's about 20 or so here that show some variances of any significance. For example, the fuel and oil being up 122% due to plan. Well, we know that was related to the airport. You can see some trends there with conferences and meetings and training. Those are all down fairly significantly this year. The wages and benefits are down 4%, or expected to be down 4%. Not that we cut people's wages, we just didn't have people in the seats soon enough compared to what we had thought. So that's primarily the savings that we experienced there. Is there Visa, MasterCard discounts? Those primarily relate to things like fuel sales. So we pay a Visa fee for fuel sales, and even the new compost facility, wherever they're using or we're accepting Visa, there's fees associated, and those have gone up quite substantially, just primarily due to the volume of sales and this mostly comes out of the airport.
Wasn't there also a huge payment for taxes paid by Visa, MasterCard this year?
We still don't accept Visa for taxes. We don't accept Visa. You can pay Visa, I correct myself on that, through the PayTM on our website. You can pay by Visa for your taxes and your utilities, but that is something that the customer will pay. They will pay a user fee to do that, so that doesn't come back to us as a Visa charge.
And we can't build that into the fuel sales or compost the same way?
It might be something we should consider when setting the rates for those, because everyone is paying by Visa for that. So if we want to increase the rate, but Visa payment allowed, there is no debit option obviously up there. It's just strictly Visa.
Sorry. I thought they'd done that anyway.
Anything else on that page jump out?
Not for me.
Okay.
I agree, do you have any concerns? No, that's not right.
Okay. Okay, so on page 6 here, the exciting stuff that we're getting into now, the reserve and surplus balances by fund. So we show estimated surplus of 1.1 million. We've got capital spending of about 4.8 million. With that, there's certain things that you add back in, like you add back in depreciation and those sort of things. The net impact is a decrease in our reserve and surplus balances of 528,000. So 2019, you can see we're at 14.4 million. This does not include DCCs, by the way. It's just strictly reserves and surpluses. 2020 year-end audited statements, we were at 12.5, and if things end up the way they are here, we'll be at just about 12 million in reserves and surpluses at the end of the year. The plan itself, the way it was set up, would have been a drawdown of 3.5 million in reserves and surpluses. That is if we would have completed all of our projects in our financial plan for 2021 with all of the grant funding and everything included. We would have drawn down that by about 3.5 million. We've deferred a number of projects, as you'll see in the 2021 capital summary, that will impact those reserve funds in the future. So those things have to be accounted for with the 2022 capital plan and so forth. But if you like, we kind of pumped the brakes this year and we're down $500,000 on the reserves, but we pushed some projects forward to future years. There is funding in the reserves for general, and I note here that 1.4 million that's sitting in the general reserve is sitting in the financial stabilization operating reserve account. So that's generally dedicated to operating type expenditures. Now we've had a whole bunch of things that are operating related costs due to COVID. So what we will do at the year end here is we will take those costs, bring them into revenue, and then they'll go into general to be used for capital projects. So right now it's just a little caveat there that there is a big number that's in operating reserves that would be moving over to capital. So looking at the charts below the general, we can see that that has come down over the last 3 years. Sewer down, but not as steeply as general, and then water has actually gone up. Some things to note here is We do charge a parcel tax for sewer, and we charge a parcel tax for water. And those help contribute to those surpluses in those specific areas. Question is, are we charging enough of a parcel tax, too much of a parcel tax for those? When you factor out the parcel tax, are we covering our operating expenditures for water and sewer? Do we need to look at user fees for water and sewer and modify those so that we're covering our operating expenditures? So those are some things that we want to bring forward. We'll do a bit of an analysis on that, but it appears to be that when we look at the net revenue for water for the year, we're about $182,000 favorable on net revenue for water. But included in that is $500,000 in parcel tax. So when you back that out, we're actually it's costing us $320,000 to operate the water beyond what we receive for user fees. So should we be increasing the water fees? And it's even higher when we look at sewer. It's a higher operating cost because they were not even with that parcel tax running at a surplus. So some things there that we'll bring forward in more detailed analysis when we look at that, because we can change the parcel tax on an annual basis quite easily. It all gets added onto the overall tax bill, which is a combination of general, which is our tax increase, our rate increase, and then parcel taxes for water and sewer is what shows up as the three major charges on the property tax notice. So decrease these, increase general, that kind of a discussion to be had there.
And to the CAO, we have a number of things planned over the next little while. Are we going to be able to get to the DCCs, the tax exemption, and perhaps even OCP over the next 12 months or so?
The answer, Your Worship, is yes. You're well aware that the OCP is underway, and you've got a number of OCP consultation sessions that you're going to be having with the public here as a result of some of the draft policies on the OCP being out. As far as the development cost charge bylaw, that is absolutely something that we've got slated for the course of the next year. We recognize the importance of advancing that and, quite frankly, unlocking some of the funds that are currently in that DCC reserve as it stands right now. There are significant balances in these reserves, but there are also projects that, should they come forward, would make use of these reserves in fairly significant measure. Water, I don't think it'll probably take you guys too much guesswork as to how those funds could be utilized. I think that water metering, even if you were successful in getting a grant, you'd have a fairly substantial city portion, and I would imagine a lion's share that would be coming from that water reserve. So I don't think that there's necessarily any problem with where we're sitting on that front. Sewer, you've got maybe a bit more in there than I think would be ideal as it stands right now. I don't know if we have any immediate projects that would sort of address that gap, but plans are in the works to make sure that we get these stabilized and where they need to go, and as Wayne indicated earlier, those will be recommendations will come forward to council.
Thank you.
So on page 7 is a listing of Q3 forecasted variances for the capital projects. On page 7 is a list of the projects that will be, they maybe already are completed or will be completed in 2021, and the overall spending on those particular projects. And the far right 3 columns there is related to the variance. So where there is a positive variance on those projects, and it actually gets transferred, it's less of a reduction from the reserve accounts, if you like. So we had a $181,000 favorable variance for all of these projects combined. So that means we draw $181,000 less from these reserves. And in this case, all of these projects were the general reserve accounts. So the highlighted ones here, there's about 3 of them there that we will be over plan on, and the remainder of them are under plan.
I have a question on pickleball. 130,000 of that came from the TNRD donation, the rest of that was totally our cost out of capital?
That's correct, out of general facilities reserve in the capital general area.
Okay. I just didn't know what our portion turned out to be.
It will be 21,000 less than what we had forecast. So I think we were going to be 60,000 or something of the 130 is funded and 60 from the city, so it'll be less than that.
We're about 39 on our side.
Yeah. So that's the completed side, and then on the next page we've got a list of projects that are not completed, and there's categories here for not completed and rebudgeted, and some that I say rebudgeted actually may just be not completed and will carry forward. The rebudget was for things like Bow Street Phase 2. Like, we're going to bring back a different budget for that altogether. It's not the $7.5 million, it's something new. It might be Phase 2, Phase 3, so that's why that would be totally rebudgeted. We're not sure on things like Civic Center network install or firehouse switches. Those were approved. Maybe they are 8,000 and 10,000, and they'll just be brought forward again as a carry forward, or we need to look at those and rebudget them. So generally there's $7.5 million in projects that were included in our financial plan that we've spent a little bit of funding on, and we will be carrying forward 2.3 million, for example, in the not completed projects would be carried forward into the 2022 plan. And yeah, that's that one there. So that's the list of those. Budget amendments on page 9. So just a recap again, and only thing that's been added to this list, I think, since the last meeting was the Recreation Services elevator repairs, which was a capital project. So this is a list of things that changed from the financial plan to the amended budget, which I've used for this report. Increases for capital projects and increases on the operating side as well.
Now, the Middlesboro Bridge Coldwater Trail project, that is the bridge by our RV park. That's the correct name for that one, Middlesboro? Over by the Tolko site.
You know which one you're talking about, but I'm not going to go and say which one's the correct name. I've heard it out.
I'm awfully confused, also confused on that too.
But that, we are talking the same bridge. You've got
Okay.
I call it
Well,
Bow Street Bridge, is that one?
You call it Boat Street, I call it Tolko, and
You want to hide
Some
it?
people call it Central because it's right beside.
okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a new one.
There's one thing I know, I don't know what the bridge is called.
Signage, it's on
Or
the,
Playbank Street. Still there.
yeah.
We should have a naming contest.
No, we should.
No.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry I brought it up.
No, I didn't.
But that is the bridge, that one. Okay, thank you.
Okay, on the next page. So now we're starting to get into 2022. So that's a bit of a wrap on 2021, operating and capital. So as mentioned earlier, we've worked with directors and managers to put together a list of 2022 projects with, along with some specific operating projects, things like master plans and those sort of things. And we're going to present those to council at an upcoming meeting, and we don't have that date for you, but it will be within probably the next 2 to 3 weeks at the most. We're prioritizing this list. We put together some stuff here today that Sean will go through with you on. Even with, as mentioned, the $4.8 million in capital spending and the $1.1 million surplus, we saw a net reduction of $500,000 in our reserves. So it doesn't take much to start to eat into our reserve balances. $3.5 million in capital can be covered by reserves in a normal year without dipping into the reserve balances. But beyond that, if we go $7 million or $10 million in 1 year, we're going to see a substantial decline in reserves.
Wouldn't that be nice if we ever got down to the point where that's all we needed was $3.5 million to do everything?
That would be a nice, nice situation to be in. So in 2021, we were pretty heavily dependent on grant funding for the massive list of projects that we had on the books there. And we will still be going heavily for grant funding in 2022. But in order to ensure that we do complete projects in 2022, I think what our goal is to bring forward is a list of projects that we could fund through our reserve accounts. 2022 looks to be a reserve account year, maybe a little bit of DCCs. As John mentions, we're doing the DCC bylaw. That will be in place sometime during 2022, but would be a tool used for 2023 and beyond for funding, more so than 2022, because the projects just don't match up with what we have in our plans. So that's where we're at. So I'm going to pass it over to Sean Strang here, and he can speak to the projects that have been identified, and you guys can speak to the ones that are of priority to you.
Thanks, Wayne. So as Wayne mentioned, this is kind of a sneak preview. We are in progress this week, kind of rounding out the list and firming everything up here, but we wanted to bring some to your attention. The first graph didn't actually appear on the PDF, but it is up on the projector screen. So just to give you an idea of some of the larger projects here, Bow Street is, I guess, the keystone, capstone project that we're looking at for 2022. That is a reformulation of last year's project. So if you remember last year, there was one about double the price. So we were unsuccessful for the grant last year, but of course, if you've driven up and down that road, there's still some desire to do some work in there. So we've rebranded that project and chopped the scope in half and are proposing it out of reserves instead of grant funding for now. West Merritt Active Transportation Path is a 2021 project that had some iteration, had some changes, and we are super excited that qualified for a 78% grant. So that's honestly going to be a big chunk of you know, the large dollar value ones, the headline ones. Cleesby Street Extension, Coldwater River Dike.
Can I interrupt for a second, John?
Yes.
When you say we have 78% grant, is this the full grant or is this the 78% portion?
This is the full project, and go ahead.
Just noting that there's 150 spent on this, so this is the carryover of what was on the books for the last go round, and so yeah, we've got 78, but you've also got the trail portion that came with the Community Amenity Contribution Fund with TOCO that is being allocated to that project as well. Yeah, sorry, my apologies, not TOCO, Trans Mountain. I better get that right for the public. Trans Mountain. So, yeah, the actual city spend on this one by the time all is said and done will be negligible.
Free project. Cleesby Street Extension, Coldwater River Dike, we'll get into a little more detail on those as we proceed. The Quill Channel Land Project is an exciting thing that we're working on, packaging up some land and turning it into housing. Southeast Fire Hall land acquisition. So some of these land acquisitions that are coming up in that 3 to 5 year time horizon, we're talking about how those get presented to council. Right now we're presenting them, but we don't really know nor have any particular parcel in mind. We just know that there may be something that comes up. So we'll be bringing that forward to council as actually I don't know what the format is, but we're going to be talking a little bit about land acquisition in the coming weeks here and how those get presented. Sewer upgrades from Gateway 286, so that's kind of a sub-project. The Gateway 286 development, of course, has their own user fees, has their own taxation for their aspect of it, but upon engineering analysis, there was a few things within the city itself that needed to be upgraded in order to accommodate that, just stuff that probably should be upgraded anyway. So that is that scope. Bush Truck 4 replacement was something for the fire hall that was tabled last year and then removed, so that is just a rotating upgrade of their equipment. Cemetery expansion is phase 2 of what was done last year. So last year was phase 1. This year we're coming forward with phase 2, and that'll be it. Rotary Central Park Trails, that is another grant opportunity that we were successful for. So lots of active transportation stuff, grants centered around that active transportation piece in the top 10 list here. And then the top 10 didn't quite, we were looking through the projects. There's actually over 70 projects at this point that we're evaluating what to bring forward, what council wants to see. And then we just highlighted some that maybe didn't make the top 10 by value list, but are fairly important or directions from council. So you've seen a lot of these. It's skipping down about halfway. We've got FD013, the Structure Protection Unit. That's brought forward from the fire hall for next year for acquisition. And that would be an asset that could be rented out in future years, and hopefully that we'll buy it, we'll get it approved, we'll buy it, we'll never ever rent it out again, but I think we all know how likely that is, sadly. Interior ceiling clean and paint is in the arena there. Some thermal paint is starting to chip and peel, and they do a really good job keeping that building in pristine shape. Airport fencing is a project that we are working on right now. There's an airport fencing project and an airport lighting project. So this has moved around a little bit even since I've done this graph. So we will be bringing forward something for the airport, something for the airport fencing, something for the airport lighting, to be determined. We will bring it forward next week. And the welcome to Merritt signs, I think, is something that we've chatted about before, perhaps needing refurbishment and replacement with something a little more in line with our current slogan and image. The asset management plan we talked about a few weeks ago with council here when we applied for that grant, and so that is year one of the asset management program, which includes a capital portion, and then there's also, not shown on here, an operational portion of about the same. And the difference between those, of course, purchasing software is more of a capital, and having a project manager to run it is usually a little more of an operational expense. So those will come before council. Auditorium flooring just is something that's been put forward, needs to be done eventually. Downtown washrooms, that is another one that changed after we did this. So there's a few different options we're running through for washrooms for the build out of eventually multiple washrooms in that entire downtown corridor. I believe this actual project is not going to be in the final slate, but there will be another washroom project that is coming forward. The timing on the downtown ones may not be appropriate for the 2022 fiscal cycle, but we will make sure that we move forward in the direction that council has asked us to proceed with washrooms. Fire Smart Interpretive Garden, that is an interesting project at the fire hall. Now that we have Krista Menard in that position, she's doing a lot of creative things, and what she would like to do with that is build something without cedars. Other than that, that's all I know. There will be no cedars in it. To give a little bit of education to the community on, don't landscape with bark chips. Yeah. Some ideas about, because we had a ton of feedback, and a lot of members of the public asking this year, should I water my hedges? Can we water our lawns? If I'm doing a re-landscaping project, what should I do? So that's kind of a cool thing to point at. And then the sound system replacement, that may or may not proceed, actually. So there's been a lot of change on this in the last few days here, for sure. Sean?
That's the one thing that I really want to drive home for council on this is, when Sean said, we want to give you a sneak peek so you know what's happening, that a lot of the items that you've asked about, whether it's the shade sales or whatever else, these things are coming forward, though when you're kind of at I'm going to say it's still the early stages of a budget process, and we as staff need to make sure that we're well aligned with what we're recommending to you. So you can take a pretty good chunk of those items, and something on them has changed already in the last few days. I'm looking at the Coldwater River Dike and saying, hey, internally we've decided we need to proceed with that, but it may not be 2022. we need to have that which has been designed as potentially a grant project. So got to look for the right opportunity throughout 2022 that might be a 2023 or 2024 project. And going down the list, I think that there's a number that kind of fall into a category where there has been some changes. So please, just don't stick us to the wall when you see this next time and it doesn't look like what you see on the
And
board.
from an accounting perspective, it's Murphy's Law. If you researched it and, placed it in here, surely to goodness somebody would change the whole plan on you anyways, and you'll have to redo it.
Yeah, a lot of what we're trying to accomplish here today is to give a bit of a sneak preview, a little bit of mental priming, so that you on council, when we bring this to council, you've already kind of seen it, started to think, this project, I haven't really heard much about this. Is this necessary? Where's the shade sales? Things like that. So just a little bit of mental priming for starting to think about these projects. Obviously, it's not an inclusive list.
And from my perspective, that's a really good sign, because I know we've got staff talking together and pulling these projects together as a team rather than just throwing them at us. So it's a good sign.
And with the first section, like this is, what, 9.7 million? So a lot of these things would be applying for grants, like for Road Street.
Well, we will have the opportunity to talk to you guys about that. What will likely happen is we're going to recommend proceeding with, I'm going to call it phase 2A, because we've already done a phase 1, so 2A and 2B, so we split the project in half. That we fund from reserve the 2A and then look for grant funding for 2B. I think that a $7.5 million trigger pull is a little bit rich for the province, for a community of our size, to be able to successfully obtain grant funding. And so we're taking some of the feedback that we've received. It's pretty critical infrastructure. You could make a case that we should just try for another grant and don't upgrade that, but sometime you need to just move ahead with some projects, and we have, so long as it's done well and mindfully, we have the reserve funding for this, and we're just going to need to still continue to look at grants. And we've got, whether it's this project or Kilshenna, which is due for a significant upgrade, or Armstrong, which is due for a significant upgrade. Like there's always projects to do, and you don't want to get backlogged too much. So I think that we're going to be recommending that even independent of grant funding this year. But ultimately, you guys are going to be at the helm as to where that goes.
Well, I guess the only reason I'm looking at that is if our year end is at 4.8 million and we have 9.7 by the year, then some of it would have to fit into sewer or water. So if we do the early ask that you can get your RFPs out early for the best rates, that's wise. But our general has less than 4.9 million in it at the end of the year with the current forecast, right?
Yeah.
So that's my only,
It's fair.
playing with the calculator, looking at that, thinking,
And they're coming from different reserves, and even for the Vogue Street, I think we've got 300 and some odd that is eligible to be pulled from DCCs. And there's things that we'll do to make it so it's not all coming from general, but there will be a hit to the general account for that and other projects.
Yeah, just as kind of along the same slant here, so we see a, Coldwater River Dike, 750,000 for that. Are we gonna have a parallel budget in there, because if we don't get that for grant funding, are we gonna, that's gotta be a shovel-ready project for grant funding, right? So we're gonna see an alternative budget or a side budget there that says we need this much money to get the project ready for the grant funding, is that right?
Well, that one has already been designed. So what we're going to do is bring forward for you a list of projects that we've got on the docket that are in the process of being designed to see grants, ones that the design has been completed and we're looking for the right opportunity for grants, and then there's the projects that we'll ultimately be recommending. And so we want you to know when things are in the pipe, but I'll say that it was one of the challenges that we had for 2021. I think that we approached the budget as if we were going to get all of these grants. Now I think what we're leaning towards doing a little bit more is have these in later years of the capital plan, so that we're not ramping up, can we go, can we not go, calling the funder every 2 seconds to find out are you running the project or not, and have it where we will bring these in if the opportunity arises through a budget amendment, as opposed to counting on them being in and ultimately needing to carry things over or see what happens. So if the opportunity came up where, next month there was an application that was really for a flood mitigation type purpose, we get that project which has already been designed in there, then we find that we get the funding announcement in, June, hey, perhaps we can make a budget amendment and include it in 2022, otherwise it'll be in a future year. So
Personally, I really like that process because the budget's a little cleaner that way too. Our expectations aren't built within the public and with ourselves as councillors and that as well. I think I really like that process. Here's the projects we can have, if we get the funding, if not, here's a budget that's much cleaner, that doesn't have, it's not loaded up with things that the pipe dream. Here's a kind of thing, right? But
we would like the capital plan to be things that you can anticipate will be completed. That there's a plan to complete them in that year.
Yeah, I like that process.
Not that it was done wrong before. It's
Oh,
just
no,
we had to
not
clean
that it
up.
was wrong,
Yeah.
nothing, it's just a little bit cleaner, I think, good, thank you.
And a lot of the reasons, so, to answer that question, you're not seeing some of, there's probably at least a half a dozen between operational and capital plans or proposals to make a plan. So we're talking about engineering engagements for future projects to get things to that shovel-ready state. By the time you're seeing six digits, it's something that we're putting a shovel into. But there's a number of things in that 20 to 60,000 range that we're going to be bringing forward. As what's the next slate of grants that we can be looking for in 2023, 24, etc. So lots of forward-thinking stuff there. And then finally, so most of these, as we said, have been. We'll bring them forward at a later time. We'll have plenty of time to evaluate all of them because we don't want to rush anyone. These particular ones have been highlighted by department managers as needing perhaps a quick eye on them for various reasons. So Bow Street was brought forward as something that early approval would be very useful on in terms of mobilizing contractors and everything else. West Merritt Active Transportation Path, again, same kind of thing. Since it's fully grant funded, we need to sign off on a lot of things and be able to hit the go button on that. The bush truck, cemetery expansion, structure protection unit, those were highlighted as early approval because of contracting timeline or contract timeline. So we kind of ran into this with the hydro vac truck as well. By the time it was approved, it was a very long window, and then it carried over into the next fiscal year. It wasn't available at that time. So these are early approval because of that. Condenser replacement is early approval because it's very rusty and really needs to be done. Asset management, Reckon facilities van. We may asset management. You know the drill there. Reckon facilities van. We may be bringing something different for how the vehicles in town are replaced, but Reckon Facilities has asked that be somewhat of a priority and consideration. Yep.
Just want to elaborate a little bit on that. Whether we go this route or not, we should let council know that we are exploring for certain vehicles, because lots of specialized vehicles we wouldn't be able to do it for, but we are exploring a lease model. We're a relatively low-K vehicle user, and those tend to be the ones that work best when you're looking at kind of an enterprise fleet management type system. And so in conversations, which will allow us to do one of two things. Either we'll find that that's a money saver and it's fantastic, and if not, it gives us the comparator to be able to better understand the current system and how we go about purchasing our assets. So this Reckon Facilities van is a need, and I hear about this from Sky way more than I an awful lot, but we want to explore whether that lease model makes sense first, and so when this comes forward to you, we'll see if those vehicles are in or out, but going through that process now.
That was one of my questions, looking at potential for these, so thank you for that.
The brine pump is a similar situation to the condenser replacement, just aged equipment that we probably need to replace sooner rather than later. And the residential garbage cans is coming forward at a much higher dollar value this year just because of development. So a few months ago we did a bit of a count of garbage cans and talked to development services and did a bit of a forward-looking count on garbage cans needed and realized that we needed to bring this forward a little bit quicker to make sure that people have what they need for garbage cans, because the supply chain is lower and our demands are much higher at this point in time. So in terms of these early approval projects, just Wayne and I were chatting about the timeline, and he'll get much more into the timeline, I think, a little bit later, but just to keep in mind on the capital side, I think we'll be bringing this forward at some point next week. I'm not sure what exact meeting it will be, but at some point next week, but we won't be looking for final approval till towards the end of November, last week in November kind of deal, maybe third week in November. At that point, we'll be bringing forward this list of capital projects in its entirety for, feedback, not necessarily approval, but approval to move forward for including them in the 5-year plan, after which point it can still be modified and changed and questioned. These specifically early approval projects will likely be moving for actual approval in that November 25th, 26th, whatever that meeting is. And then we'll probably be looking to cut POs on those in that December timeframe. So that's what we're kind of looking at those, just to expedite those by a month, month and a half, 2 months, however long that takes. Any questions on those?
I just have one other comment, if you would allow me, Your Worship. I will let council know, I'd probably brace yourself, and I think Councillor Church was picking up on it. This will be, from an actual city spend perspective, one of the biggest, if not the biggest year that we'll be putting forward in terms of what we're going to be proposing for city expenditure. We'll be laying out at the first budget committee of the whole meeting kind of what the overall plan is and getting council's thoughts and buy-in towards that, because the day needs to come and we're going to be targeting somewhere in the neighborhood of 2025, 2026 where the net operating from our community needs to be able to roughly fund the capital expenditures, and ideally you're starting to shift the other way where you're stockpiling and adding to reserves as opposed to drawing from reserves. So we've got a plan that over a 4 to 5 year time period we need to be moving that direction. That being said, we have a lot of needs now. We have some reserves that are available to be utilized, and we're really going to be pushing forward what is an aggressive plan to start addressing some of the infrastructure deficit, continue to move with our grant funding, but we want you to know that you're going to see a big number for capital spend, and unlike what I would say this year where a lot of it was grant dependent, you'll see a big number that is going to be an actual spend that isn't going to be anywhere near fundable. There will be a huge hit to our reserves, but we'll make sure to sell out the plan so you can understand where we're at numbers wise, and we can go from there. So just prepare yourselves, because even with what you can see on early approval, that in terms of dollar value is basically it's more than what we spent in capital this year, for example. So it's going to be a big year.
Yeah. And beyond the capital ones here that we're seeking early approval on, there may be specific operating programs that we would like to bring forward as well. Things like our line painting contract, our mosquito control, those sort of things that if we get on earlier, we can get into the schedule versus bringing it forward at a later date, and we can have lines on the road sooner, for example. So those kind of things, we may identify a few of those that we would seek some early approval on.
Move on a little bit, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, so we have a bit of a third quarter update. Nope. Do you have a?
No, I'm good.
You're good? Okay.
I can talk more.
Third quarter update and what's happening in finance on the fourth quarter. So we did have a tax sale. Sean managed that down to one property which sold. So that was pretty darn near successful. It's always good to have 0 properties, but to get it down to 1 in a COVID year is excellent. Excellent for sure. Installed some new meter reading software. So ahead of the potential to install meters, we've actually installed some new meter reading software that makes it easier for the person that does our reads for us, and also for loading and downloading meter reads and stuff into our billing software. So that was accomplished in the last quarter here as well. Again, we continue to train finance team. We've had some shortages there due to vacation and illness, and everyone is really pulling their weight to make sure things are done for us. We've expanded the review of the asset management software. We brought in directors and staff, and we reviewed 2 different products. Our goal is to purchase and install something in 2022. As you see, we've got it in the plan there for roughly $80,000. That's software and services from a consulting firm. In order to make it happen, there are costs associated with staffing as we go through that process, and that'll come forward in the operating plan. All the stuff that we've been doing here, getting Q3 forecasts and 2022 capital plans. There's also on the side a process we're going through with a consultant to do a 10-year asset management plan. So stuff that you see on our 2022 capital comes from that 10-year plan, but there's a whole bunch of other things in that plan as well that are identified across the organization. So that will be made available to council at a later date here. Permissive tax exemptions. We had some new applications. We revised some existing applications. That all went through. The EOC team, we had some participation in a Merritt evacuation alert, so that kept us busy as well. And we've been tracking the costs on these, and we're going to have to get some stuff into the province for reimbursement on the incidents that we've had this year. And we hired not fully trained, but we're training a new part-time grant writer who is really getting up to speed. You've probably met Andrew in the office, Andrew Nielsen. So that has been done, and Stephanie's now moving things in development services. Fourth quarter, the Q3 forecast, the stuff that we've just done here, the 2022 capital for council to review. We're going to do the 2022-2026 financial plan. Get that to you before the end of the year, at least for a first reading. And interim audit, the auditors are arriving here on the 24th and potentially the 25th. We've got a grant and aid deadline coming up. Is that, what's the date on that?
15th.
15th of November? December, 15th of December. The 2022 budget schedule. So proposed timeline, we're November 1st here, so gone through most of the stuff on the list. Some general discussion on 2022 budget assumptions. This would be more related to revenue assumptions and any expenditure type assumptions as well too. I mean, there are certain things on the expenditure side. You know, we're likely going to see a 2% increase on wages for union and non-union staff in 2022. But are there other things on the revenue side? You know, we talk about user fees, potentially looking at water and sewer garbage user fees. Are those appropriate? Looking at parcel taxes, talking about you know, net increase. Maybe that's the discussion there, is more net increase on an average residential unit in 2022 versus the composition of it. Taxes might go up 5%, but certain parcel fee, taxes may go down 3%. It might be a net 2% increase. So are there some thoughts from council on how the revenue side of the equation will work out in 2022 and how that will impact us building a budget for you?
One question I did have earlier, you mentioned that sometimes there are costs associated with the water. We were short a certain amount of money, and I think right now the water cost is 160 and the sewer is 200, or somewhere around that anyway.
Right.
And so what is our typical shortfall currently? And because do we take funding from that parcel now and we're coming at a shortfall?
That parcel tax for water and sewer, it just stays on the operating side. We're not specifically pulling those dollars and moving them into reserves. It's not like we bill out 600,000 and then that automatically gets transferred to the reserve accounts. At the end of the year, when there is a surplus in water or sewer, that will go to the reserves just naturally, but we're not taking it at the time that we bill it out and moving it over. Should we possibly be doing that? Probably. And then we would have a number left over, which is our net operating cost which should be covered through just user fees. So you should be covering your service costs through user fees.
All right,
Do you have a question?
no, we were looking for comment or feedback.
Take some feedback on revenue, which it ultimately is a citizen cost, I guess, if you like, across the board.
It will change so dramatically anyways, once we have new construction up and running. I mean, we are looking at keeping the mill rates and the overall cost to residents low. We're also looking at reducing industrial rates, and it's all important, but we have to have the inventory in order to be able to make it happen. Mr. Smith?
The one thing that I will signal, and this is just for council's information, is that in order to make what we'll kind of describe to you here, where we're going to get where we need to be 5 years from now, there is probably a need to have tax rates keep pace with roughly the rate of inflation. We will make the very best headway possible on non-tax revenue throughout that period. We also think that this could be significantly driven by non-market taxes, which means the introduction of new development into the tax base as opposed to just market changes. But while those will be key drivers in order for kind of the system, the numbers to work, we will be recommending to council rates of tax increases that will keep pace with inflation. So I do want to signal that to you so that you're not going to feel blindsided when we end up bringing that forward.
It also makes a huge difference with these huge increases in assessments that we've been getting over the last little while. So, and I assume they're going to continue into the future, knowing what the sales price of housing has been this last year. So, we know it all works together. And,
So we can bring forward scenarios. I mean, we can bring forward scenarios that say no change to the mill rate. We can bring forward scenarios that say a 2% increase. We can go through all of those scenarios and bring forward 2 or 3 of them, 3 or 4 of them for council consideration. That will impact the revenue line, which will tell us how much we can spend on projects and so forth. So probably, I'm guessing that's probably what you'd like to see is a few different scenarios.
so when you're looking at reducing taxes somewhere or increasing them somewhere else, I mean, it's ultimately the bottom line to the taxpayer is
Still paying something.
is the one that the community is going to notice. So how we get there and maintain, we don't need huge increases to our taxpayers, is what I'm trying to say. We need to make sure that inflation is considered, but that the overall rate of taxpayer remains as low as we could possibly get it. And still able to run the city. I know it's not an easy task. There's a lot of movement in the numbers. We don't even have some of that information at this point in hand. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. Who knows where the rate of inflation is going to be? You know, it's supposed to be transitory. It doesn't look like it's going to be transitory. I think it's going to be with us for some time, this rate of inflation. It's gone from 1.5 to 2.5 to 3.4. Now, I'm going to guess by the end of the year, we might even be that 5 to 7 round with inflation. I don't think that's all been factored through. And that's just the inflation rate they're telling us. And there is an underlying, I think you can add 2% to that rate, whatever it is, because they're reporting it. But so that's going to be really tricky here to think that we're going to be able to, rate of inflation, right now it's almost 4.5%, right? The number they're posting. So is that the kind of rate we're going to be looking at giving to the public as, boy, oh boy, and you know what year it is next year. But on the same hand, we've got to make sure our city operations are going to be running. So this is, I'm under no illusion that this is going to be an easy budget this year. We're looking at the capital plan and everything, but to try, I mean, we've got a 2% built in now with wage increases and things like that, right? We've been talking about, so there's 2% right there. That means if we go 5, we're 3 left for the city operations. So we've got we're in a really tricky situation this year, and understanding that there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be upgraded and added to and all that kind of thing, right? So, Mayor, I don't envy us this year at all on this budget. I really don't as we move forward here, because there's so many things that we still need to do in the city, absolutely. So.
Were there any specific services that we deliver that, I know snow clearing, for example, we added on to that budget last year, maintain, I guess. Are there any specific services that you feel that you're getting demand that we should be looking at and increasing the service delivery, or maybe we do too much in a certain area?
No, I'm not getting that feeling. I think I gotta look at the overall budget and see where just general increases just to keep the regular budget of the city going is enough, right? So I'm not, that's a good question. I haven't thought much about that one. Let me give that some more thought too and see where we're at. But I don't know if we're over-servicing or under where we are at this particular point, but that's a good question for sure.
I think it depends sometimes on the pocket of individuals, but we here, we're over-servicing, it's usually somebody over there saying they get more services than I do. It's hard to keep track of those kind of things or even do something about it. We do hear, and we know that staff investigate those kind of incidents, and that's the kind of efficiencies that we're going to be looking at over the next little while. From our own viewpoint, we know what we do and what we don't do, but also some of those pieces of, I guess it would be a complaint from the public. So,
Can I ask a question of council as well? And this is something that's come up as we as staff have looked at things. Where there is a revenue generating opportunity, though perhaps that revenue won't materialize till 2, 3, 4 years down the road in the future, is it the desire of council to move forward with those opportunities sooner rather than later in general? So again, there's one item that was here that Sean described, like a Kilshenna land. So you guys are familiar with the old rail bed. There might be an opportunity to subdivide, do small homes. An opportunity there, whether it would be a partnership with BC Housing, whether it would be market, or whether you bring in a developer to partner with the city on this. We don't have the final look as to what that may look like. But when you're talking, a $500,000 spend, even in order to get this kind of across the starting line, let alone the finish line, it's staff's opinion that it makes sense to start moving on these sooner rather than later, though we recognize that has implications for reserve balances in particular in the very near future. I'll say the same, even the structure protection unit, the 200 and some odd thousand that we're putting forward there. Yes, that will immediately help our community when it comes to interface fire protection, though it also presents some opportunities to be able to basically rent that unit out to the province, and so it probably would have paid for itself single-handedly this year. Hopefully the fire seasons don't look anything like that for the next period of years, but if they do, we would like to be ready with what is ultimately a revenue-generating opportunity. And so is it council's kind of general take that if staff sees an opportunity to be bringing forward, whether it's an airport hangar or some of the other things, that we at least put those in front of you and you can evaluate whether you want to make the spend this year?
absolutely.
Absolutely. I agree completely with the mayor on that. Anything to generate revenue, but it's 2 years away. If we can get going on it, the sooner the better to help the citizens out and be able to offset some of these expenses. Absolutely.
The other thing is too, with the unit, the fire protection unit, it will take a long time to be ordered anyway. So sometimes these things, I mean, even if we order it right now, how long will it take to be delivered?
Yeah.
A year?
Yeah, and we've talked about some of the obvious examples, but you keep on getting further back. City has lease parcels out at the airport. In order to get those to the spot where anybody's going to actually take it, they want to see paved taxiways and other things. So it takes expenditure in order to get to the point where you can bring revenue in on these. And we'll do our very best to highlight what we think the kind of return on investment might be, at least in a range for council, so you can understand that, okay, this $100,000 expenditure, we think that that's going to allow us to generate $20,000 in revenue each year. It's a pretty darn good investment if you can pay it off in 5 years. Even 10 isn't bad, but we'll give you that information to the best of our ability. Though I think that it might be the case that as these opportunities come up, they would be budget amendments if we needed to proceed with those.
And in terms of the whole Oceana stretch, I've been calling it a stretch, I don't know what we're gonna call it, but that development. I mean, from the beginning, even as a councillor, I was saying, let's do something with it, let's gain some funding out of it, and let's get some tax money coming back to us. So that is absolutely, I'm on board with that. I don't know who else is.
Any non-tax revenue we can generate anyway, and we always know in some situations it's going to be an outlay. It's like anybody coming into town to invest, they know they got to put X amount of money up to get Y back, right? And that's what it takes. And so sometimes we have to do that, as long as it doesn't affect the normal operations of the city. But yet in the future it will affect, because we'll have that income and that will help our budget as well, right? In using it for other things. So yes, I'm fully supportive of that. The sooner the better, I think, Mayor. We need to generate revenue for our city.
And the SPU unit, I don't see it so much as a capital revenue generating thing. I see it as community safety, and that is absolutely number one for any future potential wildfire that we're probably going to have in the coming years. That is a no-brainer. It is a safety issue, more so than revenue generating issue. Mr. Strang, did you have an issue along that?
I was just gonna. Yeah, while we were talking about inflation there, I mean, it is just from a capital perspective. As I put together these capital numbers, we've had a few projects that have been either budgeted out in 2021 or even budgeted out for the 2022 that are coming back 3 months later with a 3 to 4% or more increase in the actual project. So it's certainly something that we're struggling with internally as administration. I mean, we've got to pay the same costs and rate of inflation as anyone else. And certainly, if council's direction is to not do inflation, we can absolutely build a budget on that. But if we have 10 capital projects that we put forward that fit in the budget and they'll have a 5% increase, we often will have to make a choice of we're going to have to pull one out, because we are starting to see a lot of these contractors that we use just coming back with cost increase. So that may involve some difficult choices on either asking for more money to complete all 10 projects or only completing 9.
It's going to be a significant factor moving forward. Because even though they rate 4.4% inflation rate, contracts and everything, and that varies depending on the product and everything we're using, and shortages, supply chain problems, all that. That 4.4, man, it would be nice if that was a consistent 4.4, but I don't think that's the way it is, Sean, in the real world, right?
Right. I agree, especially when you're talking about construction costs.
Yeah, it's hard to get people to do the work sometimes. So because you have to get all these things early.
Don't envy us this year, staff and council.
I think we're in a good position to be able to, at least we're getting a better handle on what the operations are, and we're getting much better reporting of the finances. Thank you, finance. So yes, it's we're moving along, and we're getting to a better place day by day.
So the rest of November here was to go through and start to put together the operating plan. So we talk about what does it look like for 2022, revenues, expenses, what are our assessed values predicted to come in at, and how does that impact things, and so forth. So that's planned. I did have some dates on here, but we will probably revise these dates away from a regular council meeting on November 9th to a different meeting. And first thing to go through was to go through a bit of a capital plan deep dive, and then bring forward the full operating and capital plan. Mid-December was our timeline to bring that to council for a first reading. So that's what we're shooting for, is December 14th, that you would see that full plan, and you would have had a lot of time to talk about capital and reserves and so forth ahead of that meeting, because that's operating is operating. It changes a little bit here and there year to year, but this is definitely going to be a big capital year, as Sean mentioned. So.
And if we're ready by mid-December, this has to have been the first year we will ever have been ready by mid-December.
To have a plan in front of you for mid-December, yeah, it probably is.
That'd be awesome.
First time in a while, yeah.
That takes extra effort. Thank you, guys.
Probably a good thing to be ahead this year, because next year it could be a big change up in the process with orientation again next year. So.
While we're here, we could just chat briefly about public engagement options. I know we've got it in the December meeting here that we would give some direction on that, but we have in the past used the online survey. We could probably open it up more this year to open houses, which we've done in prior years, so departments can be there with, their capital projects and things that they're doing. Any preference from the committee here on engagement?
However, the public has access to, easy access to, and I know COVID is going to, who knows what our plan is going to be in mid-December, but don't just leave it to one way of accessing. Maybe any way the public can get in touch with us.
Okay.
They'll have to tell us some more options besides online and open house, but and I don't know what the numbers are for online surveys or for the people who show up to open house. I can't even put a number on it right now, so I can't tell you one is better than the other. I think we should do as many attempts at getting information as we can.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with the mayor. I think it's going to be an important year. And I would suggest it's been a while since we've had a town hall meeting. I would like to see maybe a town hall meeting around this, mayor, and get some build. What could we do in the civic center, and how many people could we engage in there? It's going to be a tough year. Yeah. I think it would be good for a town hall meeting.
Well, that would be
Kind of a mix of open house
houses
and
over
a town hall meeting kind of thing. Yeah.
Town
Yeah.
hall,
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that would be the right format.
Town hall portion and then open house or something. Yeah.
Okay. Good. So then in January, we compile the results of all of those attempts that we do to get information from the public. And in February, bring forward the plan for a second and third reading. At that point, we will have the BC assessment values. So we should be good there. And regular adoption in
Can
March.
I stop for a second?
Yeah.
Somewhere between the results that you will have, I assume there may be some need for council involvement at that point as to, would the results change drastically the budget itself? There may be something we need in there for a committee of the whole or something.
Yeah.
It may not be necessary, but it may be.
Put a committee of the whole in there, sure.
Do you mean for tax rates or the financial plan?
Not tax rates. I'm talking about the, after the public engagement opportunities.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what
Okay.
they're going to bring forward, if anything.
If it's a significant revision of the first draft, because we could do modifications to the first draft, obviously, we would have probably modifications for the second and third reading,
Yeah,
but
it's just a potential. It's not an absolute.
and then our tax rate bylaw needs to go through by May 15th is our deadline for that, so get that all approved, tax rate bylaw, financial plan, and tax rate bylaws adopted before the May 15th deadline. But the main thing is here that by the end of this year, you've got a pretty good feel for what the plan looks like for 2022, and we're not spending a lot of time in a busy time for us too, when we have the auditors on site and those sort of things.
Yeah.
We're not doing that budgeting at that time.
One item on this, Your Worship, I think that historically, the city has had very much a focus on what's happening this year, what the projects are this year, what the tax rate is going to be this year, and that's kind of what the capital or the budget process has often looked like. One of the advantages of doing it earlier, we really do, or at least I can say I would really like council's thought and buy-in onto the overall financial strategy. Where are we going to be 5 years from now, and how are we going to get there? I think that's a pretty important message that needs to be getting around our community right now to understand why particular decisions are being made, why the city's moving in the direction it is. To understand that, thankfully we have healthy reserves, but the operating picture isn't fantastic because of what's happened with reductions in industry. And so what the plans are to address that and to change it and to rebuild that, I'm going to say a healthy allocation to a capital plan and hopefully get to the spot where we're able to restock our reserves once more. And what it looks like if we're unsuccessful in that, if we go through the next 2 years and our revenue projections haven't panned out, what is the strategy going to be? So I think that there's pieces of that I would really like to make sure that not only council is leading, but is also leading with the public to make sure that we're getting that message out, because I think that so much of what council is doing it has the underpinnings of what's happening with the finances in the background, and if the community as a whole doesn't fully understand that picture, it makes it much more difficult to understand why it is that we're proceeding in the direction we are.
I would agree with that. If we're going to go for, let's just pretend to go for rate of inflation, which is going to be around 4.5%, 5%, we have to be able to explain that and justify it and validate it, right? I think that's what you're saying.
In part, and regardless of what the tax rate is, I want people to know what's happened, what the effects of kind of the loss of industry has been, what the effects of low density housing on infrastructure costs, and so that some of these concepts that have been discussed aren't discussed in the abstract, they're discussed in Merritt context.
And along with the effects of the loss of industry, there's also the effects of the city, the community, on homelessness, addictions, crime rate. Or crime in general. We don't need a rate in there. But it's just, these are issues that are affecting the public that we aren't very verbal about what we're doing about some of these issues. And if we can just have some more information to the public. Directly, we're not doing a whole lot of homeless addict kind of fixes, but we are attempting to fix, and we're not really getting that message out there. We talk to and lobby for complex care beds, and we lobby for addictions rehab. We look at trying to incorporate homeless plans in our development, and some of them come, some of them fall through. And I don't know how we can get that message out. I'm just saying, I think we need to get those messages out. Those are the ones that the public are asking about on a regular basis, and although the capital plan is great, it gets us looking forward in other areas. The immediate is not really, we're not putting the message out there that we are doing something. And if we can get away from the year look and start looking at some of the immediate messages to the public, I think it may ease some tension up there. And don't ask me for any ideas. I don't have any.
There's things that you guys are well aware of, even on that item. Let's take the Merritt Agency support table that I'm sure is not well understood or well known, and it's already informally operating, but we just sent out for another letter of support to trying to get as many of these groups as possible that are responsible for playing a role in social wellness in our community to get to the same table so we can talk through individual specifics and hopefully address problems before they arise. And there are these types of initiatives that we are working through, and getting some of that messaging out there is important. Obviously, it's always nice to put the message out when a thing is done as opposed to when we're in the process of getting it done, but I take your feedback. So,
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions or comments, and thank you very much for the reporting and the advanced reporting to us. Advanced reporting, it's just a lot better than it ever has been before. It's getting better and better all the time, so I'm trying to say thank you very much for that. And having said that, I'd like to terminate this meeting.
We're done?
We are done.